Welcome back to Financial Clarity for Doctors. I'm Corey Janoff, joined as always by Rachelle Vanderzanden.
Hello.
And today we're continuing with the housing theme and discussing home renovations. Whoop whoop. And ironic timing, we're actually getting some work done in our garage, putting like new flooring in and some storage. So pertinent topic for us personally and professionally, as a lot of our clients are undergoing renovations as well. But a few years ago, we did an episode on how to pay for home renovations. But now that interest rates are a bit higher and it's not as attractive to borrow money, we thought it'd be worth revisiting the renovation subject again. And during the pandemic, low interest rates, government stimulus checks, reduced spending on entertainment and travel led to a big renovation boom in America, which appears to be plateauing, leveling off, but it's still at a pretty healthy level. Homeowners are expected to spend around $480 billion this year on home renovations, which is up from 363 billion in 2020. So if you decide to go the renovation route, you're in good company. Lots of people are spending money on some mandatory repairs and renovations, and others are a little, more uh, nice to have, not need to have.
Optional. I think so. Today we're going to go through some reasons why maybe you would choose to renovate, some reasons that you might avoid it and run screaming in the opposite direction, and then some ways to potentially pay for it if and when you do decide to renovate. And I think this can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. We can be talking about really small projects, we can talk about really big projects, but at the base of it, like there's a few things to consider. So, I mean, I think there's lots of reasons to renovate. Like you mentioned a few of them, Corey. One other one is that I think some dynamics at home have changed a little bit over the last few years. And maybe this is going back to normal, but we have more people working at home and stuff like that too. But according to one survey that Corey found, about two-thirds of homeowners that can speak would rather renovate their existing homes than move. And I think that makes sense. We might be attached to our current neighborhood, even if we don't love our house, like I definitely am. So there are a few reasons we might want to look at renovating. Maybe when you moved into your house, you were like, this is perfect. It'll be great forever. But things have changed at home. Maybe your family is bigger now. Maybe, we are working at home and you didn't expect to work at home. So that's the truth for us at our house. Like when we bought our house, we weren't expecting both of us to be working at home. So now we basically have two home offices because we work at home at the same time, which means we have to have separate places where we can work, which means we also don't have a place for guests to stay and things like that, which again, not the end of the world, but something to consider. So the other thing could be, maybe you want to make your current home your forever home, especially if you're in a home where you have a 2.5 or a 3% mortgage. It's really, really, really hard to let go of that and buy a new forever home when rates are 7%. Like that's just not something that a lot of us want to do. It may be worthwhile to do that, but it's also something people are being more hesitant about. So it's more likely that we want to spend a little money to make our current home work for us than go out and buy a different home.
Which might be the more
And
cost-effective route too. Like you look
potentially,
at, we bought this home 10 years ago. A comparable home now is like double the price and double the interest. Like it cost us four times as much in monthly payments. Like we could maybe spend some money and make this work for us. And then it's more cost effective.
absolutely. And
Depends
you should
on
run
the
those numbers when
circumstance.
you're thinking about doing this. Just like what would it cost us to get into a home that meets all the criteria that we're looking for, that we're thinking about, like pumping some money into our house to basically make it that way. I think the other thing is, like I talked about with our neighborhood, like if you stay in your house and you do some renovations, you get to keep your community, but improve your living situation. You don't have to worry about kids changing school districts. You don't have to worry about like losing your neighbors and things like that. So that can be very appealing. Some of these home renovations just come out by necessity, like they're not really optional. Major renovations tend to be optional, but basics can be costly as well. Like maybe you need to redo your deck and it's a big deck. Like that can be a big expense. So 85% of homeowners had unplanned repair costs in 2024. That's why we have emergency reserves. It's really important part of just having a home and living. but it's hard to, it's hard to decide on these things. It's hard to decide if it makes sense, but there's lots of reasons you could potentially want to do it. I will say that we did find a survey that said 90% of homeowners are pleased with their renovations. Maybe not with the process, and we will talk about that in a second, but with the result of the renovations that they did. So, again, I think we've got some regrets that we're going to talk about in a second also, but if you do decide to go this route, just make sure you're like really well prepared for what we're about to discuss. So, Corey's going to go through a handful of reasons not to renovate, or maybe just to proceed with caution if you decide to do it.
Yes. Yeah, I asked Lindsay before this if she wanted to join the podcasts on home renovations. She's like, I have lots of thoughts on home renovations. I'm like, well, it's not about what to do, it's should you do it? And she's like, well, if you have the money, then yes. If you don't, then no. Simple as that. So that could be the whole podcast. Like, if you have the money to do it, go for it. If you don't have the money, don't go for it. But even if you have the money, there could be some reasons not to do it. One, hardly any renovations recoup their costs in resale value. So don't justify a renovation with it's going to be an investment in our home and improve our home's value. That's why we're doing it. Nope, sure it will increase the value, but the value will not go up in line with the cost. It will cost more out of your pocket than you will see in resale value when you go to sell the home. So there are very few items that do have a positive ROI. The best ROI, return on investment, is a garage door replacement. So if you have an old creaky broken garage door, get a new one. Apparently it recoups almost double the actual cost of it. So if it costs, I don't know, what do garage doors cost? $6,000 to get a new garage door. It's gonna give you almost $12,000 back when you go to sell the home. So that's probably worth doing.
Mhm.
The
I've heard like small cosmetic stuff can be helpful as well, like changing fixtures or
Yeah.
interior paint, like things like that that you can do fairly affordably.
And I'm not sure how they calculate all of that because there is
Hmm.
no like, side by side study if we took this exact same home and marketed it
Right.
with and without. But yeah, I mean, you walk into a home, it's that, that what's the term, like your first, second impression of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
It has a lasting impact. So if you walk into a home, the walls have scuffs and chips and like the hardware is dinged on the cabinets, like, all right, maybe this isn't the home we want. But if you have a fresh coat of paint, brand new
Hmm.
hardware, I mean, you can put a fresh coat of paint in your house and replace the knobs and handles in the kitchen yourself for a very reasonable cost. And, it gives you a good first impression when you're going to sell the home. So yeah, little things like that, that are rather cosmetic, but, give you the curb appeal, as they call it, I think.
Hmm.
Well, that's more
Yeah.
the outside. Yeah. Put a fresh coat of bark dust down. Pretty inexpensive, makes it look nice. Does absolutely nothing to the home's value, but it's that first impression. Um,
Yeah.
so some of the worst renovations you can do from an ROI standpoint are home additions or a major bathroom or kitchen remodel. A minor remodel, different story. Major remodel, pretty much all of those is a less than 50% ROI. So if you're spending $100,000 on a new kitchen, it might only boost your home's value by 40,000. So again, you're doing it for yourself, for the functionality, for the livability, for you, your family, etc. You're not doing it because it's going to improve your home's value. Don't do it for someone else. Do it for you. Um, See, we mentioned well over 90% of people are pleased with their home renovations. Otherwise, why would you do them if you weren't going to be pleased with it?
Hmm.
Over 80% of Gen Z and millennials had renovation regrets, while 51% of boomers had regrets. So I guess if you're older, you must know what you want and how to get it done. Whereas the
Or maybe you're
younger,
just not as likely to spend money unnecessarily.
that's probably true too.
I don't know.
Yeah, the boomers aren't sitting around watching Bravo TV and scrolling YouTube and Instagram for reno ideas. So maybe yeah, they're not undertaking some of those unnecessary projects, but neither here nor there. A lot of people do have regrets with their renovations. The biggest regret is spending too much money, followed by taking too long to complete. So brace yourselves, so 75% of renovation projects go over budget. So whatever some contractor quotes you for the cost, it's likely going to end up costing more than that. And some of that
Mm-hmm.
might be your own doing. They get halfway into the project. It's like, hey, here's a couple routes we could go. Do you want to do it this way? Or do you want to add this cool fancy feature that wouldn't be too hard to do now that we're at this juncture? And you're like, ooh, that cool fancy feature might be nice. Let's do it. And it's not too much more, but let's do it. And then you just keep doing that along the way. And before you know it, your $50,000 renovation turns into a $100,000 renovation. So, you know, be prepared to go over budget unless it's something that, hey, we're just getting this one thing done. Give me a firm price. I'll sign on the dotted line. I'm not paying any more than that. Say you're getting a bid to get your house repainted. All right, agree on the price beforehand. Done. What's the
Much easier.
cost to replace this air conditioning unit for the newer, more efficient, cooler air conditioning unit? And here's the price. All right, great. We're done. We're not adding any attachments. But yeah, for a lot of projects, there's no upper limit.
Yeah, when
Um,
you're refinishing a kitchen, it's like, here's the quote for refinishing the kitchen. And then you decide on the cabinets, and then you decide on the counters, and then you decide on the fixtures, and then you decide on the flooring. And that can make a big difference.
yeah. Yeah, it goes on and on. Let's see.
Yeah.
63% of people go into debt to complete a renovation. Almost 60% of renovations take longer than expected. So they tell you it's going to be this price and done in this amount of time. Expect it to take longer and be more expensive, whether that be delays in permitting, overly optimistic estimates, timeline constraints, labor, etc. Like I talked earlier, we're getting some work done in our garage to, put the like epoxy, it's not epoxy, but similar flooring in, and then put some cabinets and overhead storage in. And the guys come out on Monday and they're like, yeah, there's a note here. There might be some moisture in the concrete in your garage floor. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, well, we need to test it. And if it's above a certain level, we gotta like figure out what to do. Like, okay, so they zap it with a laser and like, yep, it's above the certain level. Like, couldn't you guys have done this a month ago when you did the bid instead of like have us clear out our entire garage this week so that you can come do the work and then show up on Monday and tell us you can't do the work because there's moisture? Like, this seems like an easy fix if you had just accounted for it. It was in the effing notes. Like, why wasn't this planned for?
Yeah. The fact that they noticed it ahead of time and
Yeah.
like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm like, gosh, I wanted to strangle someone. I still might. But so yeah, anyways, our garage is emptied. They put some moisture removing agent on the flooring, which did the trick, but they like bumped our job back to the back half of this week because they couldn't do anything for a couple days, so they bumped up another job. So I guess supposedly tomorrow they're coming out
Yay.
to do it. But it then delays the amount of time. Like, we just rented a U-Haul to put all of our garage stuff in for the week. But now I gotta like call U-Haul and be like, hey, can I extend this into next week? And then I'm gonna need some money
Yep.
back from these guys. So
Yep. Oh my
um,
goodness.
so yeah, prepare to be frustrated no matter how big or how small the task is. Like, even changing out your like towel rod holders or like the toilet paper holder in your bathroom, even if you do it yourself, like, it's gonna take longer, be frustrating. The screw holes aren't gonna line up with the existing molly
You're
bolts.
gonna
Like,
like not hit the stud the first time if you need to
yeah,
hit the stud, and then you need to drill another hole.
exactly. Like, it's never ending. But
Hmm.
all right,
Yep.
what else we got, Rochelle?
I think that large renovations can be very disruptive to home life. So that's a reason to consider moving cautiously with this. You might need someplace else to live for an extended period of time, especially if you have kids at home and you're doing something like a kitchen remodel and you just don't have a kitchen for 2 or 3 months. Like, I mean, your house may not be livable depending on what kind of project you're doing and what kind of people you need to take care of at home. Like, if it's just you and a partner, maybe you can rough it for a bit. But, if the walls are open, you probably can't. Like, everything's open to the elements and you're just like out there in the air. No. So, I mean, do you want to live with your parents for that long? Like, do you, like, I have lots of clients who have done that. And when these renovations drag on longer, living with the in laws becomes more problematic over time. So, just think about all of those little nuances that you may have to deal with personally in your household. And if you're still not dissuaded, just make sure that you're going into this process with reasonable expectations. And those reasonable expectations are not what the contractor told you. They are what you now have added on top of that expectation. So, like, let's assume it's going to take 50% longer and cost 50% more, just as like a worst case scenario. Maybe that's not even the worst case scenario, but to give yourself a good sized buffer of what you can expect and what you can just handle mentally if things start to go downhill and not go super smoothly.
Yes. So if you aren't scared off yet and you're still listening, assuming you want to proceed with your renovations, here's how to do it. Here's some ways to do it. Here's some things to consider before doing it. Um, Reassess those financial goals. So if you start putting a significant chunk of money into your home, what is getting put on the back burner? Like, this is opportunity costs here. A dollar spent over here is a dollar you can't spend over there. So are we sacrificing retirement savings, college savings, vacations, paying off debt? Like, what are we doing? What could we be doing with that money that's now being spent on this home? And is that going to have some serious consequences for us? You know, if we're behind on retirement savings, we don't have a healthy emergency reserve, you know, college, you know, we haven't really put much money in there, and that's a priority for us. It's like, all right, well, do we really want to be spending a healthy amount on this home renovation when we have some other areas that could use some improvement? But if we're on a healthy track for retirement, you're on a healthy track for the level of college you want to pay for, you're still able to take the vacation that you want to take, and you just have some extra money, fantastic. You know, yes, hypothetically, like if this is a major renovation, it's going to cost $200,000. You could have invested it and accelerated that path towards financial independence. You know, is it worth delaying retirement a couple years in order to undertake this? Or maybe you're again ahead of schedule for retirement savings and you simply have an extra 200,000 lying around. Good problem to have. Let's go. Let's do the home renovation. So, you know, something though to sit down and consider. Where are we at with our objectives? Are we on track? Are there other areas that need more attention, or are we content with where we're at and spending money on this project in lieu of some other things?
Yeah. One thing I was just thinking about that we didn't talk about ahead of time. One other thing to assess and be really honest with yourself about is like, after this renovation is done, is this a house that you want to stay in for a really long time? Or is it still not good enough? Like, if you're like, be very, very honest with yourself. If I do this kitchen remodel, is the rest of the house satisfactory? Or am I still going to be like, I want to move in 2 years? Because if so, you've just wasted a bunch of money and like flushed it down the drain. So, like, you've got to either do the renovation and make it a good home that's going to last you a long time, or just not do it and buy a different house if you're not willing to commit to the renovations that will make it satisfactory to you. So that's one thing. Just don't do it and then move.
Especially if it's a major one. I mean, if it's a minor thing that doesn't cost a ton of money, like,
Yeah,
you know, you're putting
redoing
in.
flooring or whatever like that just has to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you're putting a new bookshelf in your office or, you know, changing
Yeah.
out the light fixture, like little things that aren't really breaking the bank, and then go for it. But yeah, I mean, if you're ripping out your carpet and putting hardwood throughout, but like you said, you're going to move in 2 years, or like that seems kind of silly, in my
Hmm.
opinion. Maybe not in yours,
Absolutely.
but like, yeah, is this going to actually make the house what you want long term, or are we still gonna be hop skipping out of there? And sometimes it's unplanned, job change, etc.
Yep.
But that's just life. But if it's you know, if you're just slapping lipstick on a pig to not really enjoy it, like what? Let's not do that.
Yep. When you have committed and you are ready, obviously you have to pay for it. So that's what we'll talk about next. I think cash is easiest. So if you have decided this is what you want to do, like if you already have significant cash savings, that's not your emergency reserves, awesome. If not, I would say start saving cash now and get at least a solid like chunk of cash saved up, just depending on how large that remodel is and everything like that. Because the current interest rate environment just makes it kind of unattractive to finance a lot of this stuff. Like interest rates are high. We don't necessarily want to borrow or at least borrow a lot to be able to do this. So start saving cash now. Put it in that high interest savings account so at least it can earn some interest. and get a start that way.
And that's a
The other
perk
thing,
of interest rates being
yeah,
higher is you're actually getting some interest on your cash. You know, you're
yeah,
getting around 4% in the savings account, maybe as we record this, about 4.5 on short-term treasuries, CDs, et
hmm
cetera. So there's ways to make a little money on your money that's idle at the moment.
hmm and then also make sure you go through your monthly cash flow. Like we don't talk about budgeting a lot here, but like what does your cash flow actually look like? What are we spending from month to month? What is extra? And I think landing on that dollar amount that's extra each month is a good way to know how much of a cushion you have when you start with this process. Can you easily absorb the extra costs of a rental if needed? If you do need to like get out of there, just have a place to crash for a while that like renovation is ongoing. Can you easily absorb extra costs if you go over budget? Like if the contractor comes back to you and is like, hey, because we're doing this additional fixture or like doing this finish that's more fancy or whatever, like it's going to be $5,000 extra. Can you just give them $5,000 extra because that month you had $5,000 that you weren't spending? Like if that's the case and you just have extra cash flow every month, it will be a lot simpler and a lot easier if not like than if you don't. So if you're living kind of paycheck to paycheck, this is not going to be a pleasant experience. Yep. And then you can borrow money. So there's a few options below. Maybe you need to borrow $50,000 at 7.5% interest to complete your backyard living area and landscaping. You want to do it in the spring so the family can enjoy it all summer, but you don't have the money right that second. If you feel like you can pay off the loan at the end of the year with an annual bonus, like, hey, you're in pretty good shape to at least get rid of that debt quickly. So 7.5%, we don't love that. You're paying extra money to make this happen and make it happen early. But if it's worth it for you to have that living space earlier, then maybe it's worthwhile to do. So you're essentially like with that $50,000 loan at 7.5% interest, you're essentially paying like two and a half to $3,000 in interest to have an extra summer of enjoyment with the kids. You know, you only get 18 of them. They are only young lunch. So it could be worth it. You just kind of assess that for yourself. Is that price tag worth it to me? And I think that's a good way to think about those things. Just figure out the numbers.
Yeah, and especially if it's an interest or a debt that you can pay off relatively quickly. You know, borrow the money in the spring, pay it off at the end of the year. We're what, 8, 9 months of interest expense, not too brutal. It's when it's we're borrowing this money, but it's going to take us a decade to pay off at 7, 8, 9%. That's where it's a little more painful.
Brutal.
Yeah.
It's brutal. Yeah. Yep. So if we need to, like, let's just talk a little bit about what that borrowing money looks like. So most of the time with home renovations, a lot of people use a home equity line of credit or a HELOC. And basically what it is you're borrowing from the value of your home. So if your home is worth $600,000 and you have a $300,000 mortgage, there's some wiggle room there to be able to borrow some money. Most banks won't let you go beyond like 80% loan to value. So if you bought the house with a physician home loan and you only put 10% down a year ago, like we probably don't have enough equity in our home where we can do a home equity line of credit. So keep that in mind when you're making these decisions or like thinking about like what are my options here. Those interest rates are high right now because interest rates are high. So they are typically variable, typically tied to the prime rate, which right now is at 7.75%. So as of November 2024, when I was Googling this a little bit earlier, the average rate of a HELOC is like 8.7%, which is just gross, just not fun.
Could
like
be
it,
worse, but yeah, not
of course
not
it could
ideal.
be worse, but no, thank you. But again, if you're doing that and then you could pay it back relatively quickly, it's not as big of a deal as if you're holding on to that loan for 10 years. So, I mean, just think about like, okay, how much am I taking out? Like, how long is it going to take me to pay it back? All of those things. Work those numbers for yourself. You can open a line of credit proactively and have it open and not use it. So if you go to the bank and you want to have a home equity line of credit so that you have that option available to you as a backup, like just proactively know that it's there, that can be a good solution and just like not use it unless you have to. So if you open it, you never take out any money, you don't pay any interest. Like simple as that. But if you open it and it's $100,000 line of credit, you can use up to $100,000, but you could also only use 40 if you only need 40. So it's kind of a nice, very flexible option for things that are somewhat unpredictable, like home renovations.
And it's basically a large credit card backed by the value of your home. So the interest is going to be a lot more favorable than a credit card because if you don't repay it, they could foreclose on your home. But yeah, I'm a big proponent of pretty much everyone who has a healthy amount of home equity, just establish a home equity line of credit. Usually they last for 10 or 15 years. Like that's how long you have to borrow money, and then you have another 10 or 15 years to repay it often. So it's just a nice backup emergency fund available if you need a chunk of cash and you don't have it in your bank account. It takes about a month to establish. It's kind of like a mini mortgage in a sense that you got to go through underwriting, submit financial documents, they got to approve you. It's not as costly as a mortgage to establish. Some banks will even do it for free for you if you already have accounts with them. Um, and and check the terms. Some will have an annual fee to maintain that HELOC. Some don't. See what the interest rate is and how long you have to potentially use that line of credit. But it can be a nice thing to have, just in case you might need it one day, even if you don't have any intention of using it.
The emergency
Um,
reserve for your emergency reserves.
Bingo. Yeah. So you don't have to go into credit card deck or find loan sharks or whatever. Let's see. What else can we do? Tap into your brokerage account. If you have a taxable brokerage account, something that's not a retirement account like a 401k, IRA, etc., but just a regular old investment account, those are fully liquid. You can get to that money at any point in time. Now, we talked earlier, what's the opportunity cost if we're earmarking this brokerage account for retirement and we're now pulling out of it? That's money that's now no longer earmarked for retirement, which will, in theory, set us back a little bit on our retirement timeline. How much it'll set you back really depends on how much you're pulling out and what your current outlook looks like. But it is a very accessible option. So we can tap into those. If we do sell out of our investments to fund whatever, whether it's a home reno or something else, but if you're pulling money out of that account, you'll have to pay capital gains taxes on any investment gains at the time of sale. So let's say you need $50,000, you are going to pull it out of the brokerage account, and your cost basis, which is what you contributed, amounted to 30,000. The other 20,000 is investment earnings. Well, when you pull that 50,000 out, you're going to have to pay capital gains taxes on the 20,000 of investment earnings at federal plus state taxes if you have a state with capital gains taxes. So, just be mindful of that. There's potentially some tax consequences of doing it. Um, and depending on how long you've been invested, how big those potential gains are, that tax consequence could be a bigger pill to swallow. If we don't want to pay those taxes, but we potentially need to tap into the brokerage account,
Especially
there's
if it's for a short period of time and you can pay it back quickly.
there's securities backed loans or lines of credit. And this is like Rachelle said, if it's a short term borrowing, like, hey, we need to borrow money for 6 months, we're going to put it right back in the brokerage account. Well, it seems kind of silly to pay a bunch of capital gains taxes when we're just reinvesting that money pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So we can actually borrow against the brokerage account, just like your home equity line of credit. You can do a securities backed line of credit or a securities backed loan where, similar to the HELOC, but you're using your brokerage account as collateral instead of your house. And again, similar terms, yet it's tied to the prime rate often, or maybe the Fed's fund rate. You're probably going to be in that higher single digit interest rate at the moment. I've found that the securities backed loans and lines of credit are often a little bit more competitive interest rate wise than the home equity ones. And I imagine that's simply because it's a lot easier to foreclose on the securities than it is on a house. So there's typically a threshold. So we talked about the 80% loan to value with your home equity. Uh, the securities backed ones have similar provisions, depending on the investment company, it might be 50%, maybe it's 70% of the account value. So that's like the borrowing limit. And if your loan value exceeds that threshold, they'll say, hey, repay the excess amount back, or we're going to force a sale of some of your positions in your account to get that debt back in line with our maximum threshold. Um, so something to be mindful of because your brokerage account is going to ebb and flow with the market and go up and down. So you typically don't want to borrow up to the maximum limit because if your account value goes down, it's going to require a forced repayment of a portion of that loan to get your loan balance back under the maximum percentage of the account value. Um, but it's definitely an easy way to tap into that value of your brokerage account without having to be subject to taxes on it. And you can just do that calculation. Hey, is this capital gains tax going to be greater than the interest expense for the time period we're planning to take the money out? Or maybe the market's at a low point and you feel like there's a lot of growth potential on the horizon. We don't
Or you
want to
just
miss
don't want to
out.
sell investments when they're down.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that can be a useful tool. Again, if you have a decent amount of money in a taxable brokerage account, it could be good to establish a securities backed line of credit just to have. Usually there's no fees to establish it and there's no expiration date. So it's, the only cost is the interest expense when you borrow money. So that's a useful tool for a lot of people, especially when you have a healthy amount in those accounts.
There's a minimum account balance for those usually, right?
Yeah, most institutions will have a minimum amount that you need. I think at one of the companies we use for a lot of our clients, I think has a 25,000 minimum. So you probably need at least 50,000 in your investment account in order to have a $25,000 loan. But that's where I said, like, if you have a decent amount, so if you have $10,000 in a brokerage account, not applicable to
Not
you.
worth it.
But if you've got a
Yeah. Yeah.
six-figure brokerage account balance, could be worth establishing. And then, unlike a HELOC, the maximum borrowing limit adjusts as your account value adjusts. So with your
Hmm.
HELOC, it's underwritten. They're saying, hey, you're eligible for a $150,000 line of credit.
Yep.
And even if your home value doubles over the next decade, you're still at a 150,000 borrowing limit on that HELOC. Whereas with the brokerage account, that borrowing limit is just set as a maximum percentage of the account value. So as your account value
Which is very
grows,
easy to establish. Whereas,
yeah,
like, your home value is not as easy to establish. So that can get complicated as well.
yep.
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple of other options. I've had clients reach out to family for temporary help or even more permanent help. Like, hey, we know our parents have this money kind of earmarked for us, and we kind of are going to ask them, like, hey, could we maybe have that now instead of later? And like, and that could be totally a way to go about it, depending on the dynamics of your family. Personal loans are just unsecured debt. So if you have a home and you only have 5% equity in it, HELOC's not an option. Like a personal loan, you can potentially do, but it has much higher interest rates, generally double digit, because again, it's an unsecured loan. It's not backed up by an asset that the bank could potentially foreclose on if they needed to get that money back from you. So hopefully a very short-term solution if that's something you decide to do. Another like not good option, but also an option is you can borrow from retirement accounts. Especially like 401ks and things like that. You can generally borrow up to 50% of the value, but only to a maximum of like $50,000. So it's not a giant chunk of money that you can borrow against your 401k, but you can. Again, don't love it, but you can do it if you have to, if you need to.
Well, and you're not borrowing against your 401k. You're taking money out of your
Yeah,
401k. So you're
that's a
missing
good
out
point.
on all that potential market growth if
Yep.
it takes you a while to pay back. So again, you're sabotaging your own retirement for today's lifestyle, which case by case, if you're ahead of schedule for retirement, you're just light on cash, then maybe it's a viable option. But for most people, it's financial advisors, of course, we're biased, but we don't like to hear you taking money out of your retirement account early in order to fund quote unquote unnecessary home expenses. So
Such a gut check reaction for sure.
yeah. But again, a case by case, for some people it makes sense, for others
Well, and
it
it could
doesn't.
also be a necessary repair,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
things happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, everything we're talking about in all of these episodes are on what 143 or something is where we're at, but like it's everything is case by case. If you haven't heard us say it already, it depends. That's the beauty of financial planning. There's not some cookie cutter formula or process that applies to everyone. So
Or else we probably wouldn't have a job.
yeah. So that's
Hmm.
why we exist, because as much info as there is out on the internet, it's hard to determine which applies to you, which doesn't apply to you, what's best for your circumstance. Humans have emotions as well, so we got to weigh that into the equation. So,
Yep. Okay. In conclusion, should you do it? Should you not do it? Is it going to make you happy? If it's going to make you happy and you have the resources to do it, then probably go for it. Like let's figure out where that is on your priority list. If it's important to you, if it's going to give you some joy, you have the money, you're not going to go into giant debt over it. Cool. Let's make it happen. But be prepared for some disappointment along the way. Costs will likely be higher, timeline will likely be longer. Like it's just not going to be exactly what you picture ahead of time. So just, build in a little emotional buffer for yourself. And then consider the opportunity cost. Like, what else could you be doing with this money that may be more beneficial for your life, might bring you some joy later, like all of those kinds of things. Are you on track for your other financial objectives? If not, are you okay kind of prolonging those things? And it could be that the answer is yes, but just be really honest with yourself about what it is that you want, what you're willing to give up to get it, if you have to give up anything. So I think it's always just make sure you're looking at everything, all of the things that feed into this, and having reasonable expectations.
Yep,
Mhm.
yep. Words of wisdom.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for
listening.
listening. We'll see you next time.